Hello, my name is Sarah Cox, and I'm excited to share with you something that I have created. It specifically revolves around the grade 10 climate change curriculum. And one thing that I've noticed lately as a science teacher is that climate change is one of those units that gets stuck to the very end of a semester, kind of like we're in now. It's June 11th, and there's 8 days left in teaching, so 8 curriculum days left before exams. And often teachers are struggling to get through in that grade 10 curriculum the physics and optics unit, the biology unit, and the chemistry unit. And then as teachers, we get to the last little bit of school, and now we need to cram in an exam review. And oh, wait, I may have 1 or 2 days left for climate change. I have a web series on YouTube right now that's explaining some of my approaches to climate change, and I'd love to hear your ideas. But for right now, I'd love to share with you this guide of curated resources that I've created, specifically meant for this grade 10 curriculum in the Ontario High School. So let's look at this. The first resource should be fairly familiar with all of you science teachers out there. It's actually the Ontario Curriculum Earth and Space Science Unit. And one of the things that I love about the curriculum, and I know you probably don't hear very many teachers saying that you love the curriculum, is that it provides specific overall expectations. And with these overall expectations, there comes these big ideas. And the first big idea, when we're discussing Earth and space science in grade 10, is the idea that Earth's climate is dynamic and is the result of interacting systems and processes. The second big idea, and remember, these are like the big picture ideas, right? If you were looking at a puzzle, instead of focusing on a single piece, now we're looking at the whole picture. And the second big idea, the second big picture, is that climate change, or global climate change, is influenced by both natural and human factors. And what I love here is that we are using this idea that we have not just human influences, but that there's also natural influences. And I think that this is where we can, as a class, and we'll see this further on in some resources, really dive into climate change and really have that open and honest discussion about causes of climate change and how, yes, there are natural causes of climate change, but that human factors are accelerating those causes. The third big idea is that climate change affects living things and natural systems in a variety of ways. And I actually really like this idea because it links directly to students' prior knowledge in grade 9 science. And in grade 9 science, there is that ecosystems unit, classified under biology, where students are learning about food webs and ecosystems and habitats. And now we can maybe extend some of those ideas and allow students to think beyond themselves and apply those ideas to maybe some of the ecosystems that they talked about, or those habitats that they learned about, those endangered species, and apply these ideas of climate change and how that is going to influence these habitats. The final big idea that's listed in the curriculum is that people, as in us, have the responsibility to assess their impact on climate change and to identify effective course of action to reduce this impact. And this is a really important piece, and I like to tell my science students, usually grade 10 and 11, that their whole purpose as scientists isn't to get an A in the course. It's not to learn all of the things in chemistry, physics, biology, and earth science. It's actually to become young advocates. And as science students, they have the ability to use all of the tools that are presented to them, including the World Wide Web, and call out these resources that maybe aren't so accurate, and to use critical thinking and process skills to really narrow down that field of accurate information and then advocate for the things that they're passionate about. And what a shame it would be if students became less passionate about climate change because as educators we didn't have time to teach it. And so one of the things that I have proposed in my web series, and please follow it. It is on YouTube. It's under Climate Change Web Series. It's by Sarah Cox. Is that instead of leaving this climate change unit to the last couple of days of the school year, or only allocating a week to it, because that's all realistically, if we're lucky, we have time for, is to take a spiraled approach to science. And usually we use spiraling in math, and I'm a math teacher, so this is where I'm trying to adapt an approach that's working well in one subject and seeing if it'll work in another. But really, where I'm spiraling is not blending all of the topics of the course together, but just continuously teaching climate change throughout the whole year or the whole semester. So instead of only having a week at the end of the semester because of time, what I have done successfully last semester was to have every Thursday or Friday, or sometimes both, dedicated to climate change topics. And what this did was it allowed students to take a break from some of the harder conceptual topics that we were talking about, things like theory of chemistry, those optics diagrams, and those math problems that some of the students might really struggle with, even the memorization problems in biology and those application problems. And it gave them an idea to really understand that climate matters. And that break allowed students to look forward to this climate change. And what I'm really going to encourage throughout these resources, I've presented 10 here, there's many, many more. I will forewarn you that if you're searching for good climate change resources, specifically with Canadian content, you will have to dedicate some time to kind of sorting out the good and the bad and the ugly. But there's some great things out there. And what I'm really encouraging educators to do is to step away from traditional teaching methods. So try not to just make climate change very dull. And it's so easy to do because we're given a textbook, and by nature, especially as scientists, we will probably make some sort of PowerPoint or some sort of presentation, just like the one that you're looking at. And we will say, okay, we've presented all of the information. Our students have the information, and now it's up to them to do with it what they will. And I'm not sure that that's really how we create passion in our students. And I'm sure that we naturally do this. We naturally do hands-on activities and more critical thinking activities in the other areas of this grade 10 science curriculum. For instance, it's so easy to do with chemistry and biology with things like dissections and labs. And in that physics unit, when you get to play with the big concave and convex mirrors, so easy to create this exciting atmosphere inside of the class. But when we get to climate change, how can we do a climate change lab? And I'm going to present some resources to help us navigate this. And so the first resource that we are going to look at is actually STAO. And I'm sure that most of you have maybe heard about STAO. So STAO stands for the Science Teacher Association of Ontario. And because this is an actual association dedicated in the province of Ontario, there are many, many activities that are linked to specific and overall expectations in the Ontario curriculum. And for any science course, you can find lesson plans and activities on STAO's website. The awesome part is that STAO was actually composed of all high school or retired teachers. So these are teachers who actually had a hand in the classroom. They probably aren't that far disconnected from the classroom, very, very passionate about what they do. If you have a chance to attend the STAO conference in the fall, it's usually the fall of every year, I highly recommend it. You will get some very awesome resources. So because we have this, and you can see from this awesome chart here on your right-hand side, because this is linked to the Ontario curriculum expectations, all of the activities are curriculum relevant. And this is important for those teachers who are, really focused on, doing their job and preparing students for the next stage of the course. And this is probably, that agrees with the curriculum. I at least agree with the idea of the overall expectations. It helps to guide teachers through this teaching process and for us to kind of hit on at least some of those expectations to ensure that our students are prepared for the next grade. It also means that post-secondary, our students tend to have at least similar knowledge platforms. And again, that knowledge is never always going to be the same. In fact, it probably rarely is the same because we always insert our philosophies of education and our pedagogy into what we teach. However, the curriculum kind of gives us a pathway to follow. And while we will follow that pathway, what we drive or how we choose to get through that pathway is going to be different. And that's okay. So while STAO links these ideas to the overall and specific curriculum expectations, the really awesome benefit of this is that they also provide lesson plans as well as assessment criteria for climate change projects. And I know if you're like me, you're probably sitting there thinking, okay, that's awesome, but these are probably just boring-based assessments, but they aren't. There's a lot of actual climate change labs that you can do within this website. And these are hands-on activities. They aren't virtual labs, which we are going to talk about later. And they're very simple to construct. So most science prep rooms will have everything that you need. And specifically for this, I think one of the labs you needed basically construction paper and a lamp and a few other small resources. And it's great. And with this, because it links to those overall expectations, you can actually create assessment criteria very easily if it's not provided. So I really recommend you go through and you can click through STAO. The way that you work through this is you just find the grade that you're teaching. So our grade 10 academic science is the second from the bottom. And you would just scroll over to the climate change and click on that, and all of the resources would come up. Now, usually STAO does require a paid membership. However, check with your school board because most school boards subscribe to STAO because it's so awesome. In fact, I work for 2 school boards right now. So I work for the Simcoe Muskoka Catholic District School Board as well as the Simcoe County District School Board. And we're just north of Toronto. And both of my boards subscribe to these memberships. And further, both of my boards actually bring in members of STAO to not only run our health and safety talks for science teachers, but to also do professional development. So I really encourage reaching out to them if you haven't already. Top-notch people, they will answer your emails right away, and really, really awesome people. The link to this resource is just at the bottom of the page if you want to type it down. Or I have attached the PowerPoint presentation as well without my awesome voice and narration if you just want to scroll through for later use. So let's talk about the second resource, and I know that STAO is going to be hard to beat, but one of the things that I try to do in every course is run some sort of movie, and the reason why, or video, and the reason why isn't necessarily because I'm a lazy teacher. It's not it at all. Usually, though, I'm a coach, and I'm sure that other people are involved in their schools quite readily. And while I love making screencasts, which are another great tool, kind of like what we're doing right now, or writing up lessons and fill in the blanks on my iPad, sometimes showing a movie, though, can be very beneficial for the kids because not only is it going to give a different viewpoint on the topic that we're looking at, it also presents some very unique learning opportunities. So last year in 2016, an inconvenient sequel came out by Al Gore, and this sequel is Truth to Power. So this kind of introduces some of that political stigma around climate change. And while, I am all for Al Gore, and I think that he's doing some amazing work regarding climate change, this presents a very unique opportunity for us to introduce policy into climate change in a more interesting, less dry way. Let's put it that way. So an inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, basically talks about climate change, but also really about the U.S. administration and their reaction to climate change. And what I liked about this documentary that was presented by Al Gore is that he's really attempting to persuade government leaders. And there's some links in here in this document about the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2016. But let's just look at that date, 2016. We're sitting in June of 2018. This is very, very relevant. So there is still implications within the classroom. But this links to specific and overall expectations and even those big ideas, because we're going to get students to analyze current initiatives and to discuss human impact on climate change. And then there's also that subtextual, and not so subtextual because Al Gore can be very blatant sometimes, about that policy and how our government might influence things. What I like about the link that I've provided at the bottom of the page, so please note that this link, it's not to the movie An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. Your libraries might actually have a digital access copy to this. If not, you can rent this movie on YouTube for $3. It's not on Netflix yet, but that's there. And I'm assuming that as educators, you can kind of source a way of showing the movie. But this link on the bottom is actually from An Inconvenient Sequence Education. And this website is geared towards using this video for educators, so in the classrooms, and they've provided 2 lesson types. The first one is Watch Kit. And Watch Kit actually has students focusing on critical thinking skills, right, which we're always trying to instill in our students. And with some teacher guidance, I always encourage this teacher guidance whenever we're about to do the next step. Students will explore facts versus opinions throughout Inconvenient Sequel, A Truth to Power, and discuss the importance of credible sources. So, here's the great part. You're not just showing this movie and having students only fill in a handmade question sheet. What we're trying to do is have students look at mainstream things and even things like documentaries and instill those critical thinking values. The second lesson is called Truth in 10, and it's a writer's guide. And here, students will gain knowledge from the movie and use this information to formulate some research goals. Specifically, teachers can choose from a variety of writing tools and questions that are provided in the lesson plan. What I like, though, is to kind of take those questions and almost take a STEAM approach to this. So if this was my classroom, I might take these big essay questions and ask students to do something artistic with them and to demonstrate their knowledge by using art. And so they can use words too. In the past, I've had some great pictures and paintings come out of this. I've had flip books, so where you go through the pages and pictures kind of build on one another. I've also had students make children's storybooks, and this is very interesting. Obviously, I haven't always used this particular movie because it's so new, but just some ideas to float around, and I think that these are great ways of getting those students that may not be so engaged in strict writing tools such as essay writing, which is what the writer's guide does suggest, or some essay questions. But at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, are we assessing the science or are we assessing the English skills? And sometimes, and this is kind of a cop-out, I do know that, English skills can be left to the English classroom, and students do have that opportunity throughout the course many times to write those lab reports. So just some ideas here to float through that movie. There's lots of other good movies around. There's a home documentary on YouTube that's free to watch. My caution to you is whenever you're using movies, just make sure that as educators, you're watching the movie all the way through and you are making your own notes. So even though I may leave portions of this movie for days that I'm not there because of coaching, I always make my own notes, and I always have those discussions either the day after class or before class, okay? Usually I don't do them before class, but this year presented a unique opportunity where I was gone 3 days in a row because my students went to the OFSA regionals for badminton, and so I had to travel quite far for that. So I was gone for 3 days. So in order to connect base with my students, I had a discussion with them before, then they watched the movie, and after the segment of the movie, I kind of split it up into chunks. I also did a web series with them where we were doing face-to-face on Adobe Connect. And so I really just encourage finding a way to have those open discussions. So, third resource. This is something that I found through EduGains, and if you guys haven't used EduGains, then I really suggest it. So EduGains actually provides in-depth lesson plans for all of us teachers, which is fantastic because who likes building lesson plans? But it also links to those curricular expectations. Specifically, EduGains is really popular and very well known for instilling critical thinking skills. And in this assignment, I will tell you before you're reading this, because the title is misleading, we are not asking students to prove whether or not climate change exists. In fact, we're not even touching that. Climate change is a proven scientific fact. We are not asking students their opinion on it. I hope that as educators and as science teachers, we can get to the point where our students can look at research and understand that climate change is a proven scientific fact. Instead, what this assignment is doing is opening students' eyes of how media will spin ideas in climate change. So students are actually going to exercise their critical thinking skills by analyzing media. This critical thinking assignment will ask students to formulate opinions on why the media may have portrayed climate change in specific ways. So this is a great idea, and what I think that this presents is an opportunity to also talk about balanced reporting. And balanced reporting is the idea that in the media often we see climate change where we have our climate change discussions, where we have one expert who believes climate change doesn't exist, talking to one expert who believes that climate change does exist. And this implies that 50-50 community. So there's a 50% of the science community that believes climate change doesn't exist, and 50% of the community that believes climate change does exist. When in reality, scientists, not as a whole, but the majority of scientists do believe that and have scientifically proven that climate change is a thing. So we can talk about balanced reporting here as educators, and I really suggest you look up some tools for balanced reporting. Okay, the next one, and I love using these. They're gizmos, and if you haven't used these, your school board definitely has a free subscription. I think that Gizmo is a fantastic tool. If your school board, for whatever reason, does not have a subscription, you can join for free. There is a trial in here for you to kind of suss it out. And if you contact or if you get somebody in contact with your school board to add a subscription, they will give you a discount. Gizmos are fantastic for every grade. So there's content in here from K to 12, and they're used for all math and science curriculum. So they even, obviously, have things for climate change. And here is the link at the bottom of the page for the one that I'm using. This is a greenhouse effect gizmo. And gizmos are an interactive tool that are made by teachers. So these teacher resources and assessment questions have been made by other teachers. Basically what happens is you can search for the gizmo, and this is a great way to get students to kind of learn an idea by doing some virtual work. So they provide question packages that you can print off, or you can have students, usually I take questions from the question packages and build a Google Doc, and then they can submit them from Google Classroom, so that we're paperless. All of my students in my school, I will say I'm spoiled. They all have Chromebooks. We have a 1-to-1 Chromebook ratio program, and it's fantastic for being paperless. So what happens is that students will work through these virtual programs and answer questions as they're guided by the activity. What is really cool about this, though, is that if you have a class of high needs, which I did last semester, out of my 23 students, 20 of them have had IEPs. With that class, let's just say you have some EAs, or you yourself are not fantastic with climate change, because let's face it, we aren't experts at everything. There are teacher guides in here and teacher resources where you download those, and it will walk you through the entire activity and give you the background information that is required for you to be comfortable with teaching this lesson. So students are going through this interactive lesson. At the end, because each student has a unique learning or a unique sign-in that's attached to your Gizmos classroom, they can do some assessment. So they can do some multiple choice questions to just quickly gauge their learning, and you can use that as formative assessment because you get all of the results instantaneously. And that's what I really love about these. So students may submit the actual questions for actual assessment, and you can give feedback based on the multiple choice. You can even set it up so that they have to get a certain amount right before they can move on to the next thing. So this is really cool. I highly suggest you exploring the gizmos. The greenhouse effect is a good one that I've used, basically what happens is that you take a region of land, and daytime's rising temperatures and the falling temperatures at night can be measured, along with the flow in and out of the system. And you're just going to measure some greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and adjust them through time. And then you can see the long-term effects. So kind of a really cool experiment. It kind of just gives that theory a little bit more of an application, and students are able to visualize a little bit better. Okay. This one is a very, very quick one. So this is from Canadian Geographic, and I really encourage you, because remember, one of those overall expectations and big ideas was to discuss how we contribute to climate change. And I'm sure that students probably did this in grade 9 geography, but it's always good to connect to extra and cross-curricular resources. And so in this resource, students are actually going to go through and interactively see how big their carbon feet are. There's lesson plans here for teachers, and this is going to allow students to visualize their impact on the climate change crisis. Now, what I like doing with this activity is, instead of focusing on the negative, focus on the positive and see how we can enforce change. And so what will a small change do? Okay, what will a bigger change do? How can we shrink that carbon feet, that carbon footprint? Normally I lead this into a research paper or some sort of research presentation on ways that students can reduce their carbon footprint, but I also have a bulletin board outside of my class, and students are responsible every week for their climate change project to put up a new climate change fact and how doing something in our regular life, such as maybe not running water while we brush our teeth, can reduce our carbon footprint, and how overall these small changes can add up to big changes. And I think when we're talking about the big concept of climate change, often students think, well, how am I, at the age of grade 10, going to make a difference in our world? And this is a way that they can kind of start to see that. So I really suggest that you guys click on over there, play around with it. Some of the lesson plans are geared towards younger students, but don't forget that we can always take these ideas and apply them in other ways. Okay, so this resource is new to me. I actually just found it while I was pulling together resources. And this is called eCards. And in eCards, students can research an energy-related topic, such as a renewable resource or energy, or a non-renewable one. And there's this climate change module in here. Basically, all of these modules are going to be energy-related topics, so this is good if you're talking about sustainability. And you're going to be able to, as students, or your students are going to be able to create an informed message and artwork. And I know that this kind of sounds weird. Why would you want to do this? Well, what I said, that students who are in science specifically, their job is to be critical thinkers who are basically informing. They're young activists almost. They want to use those research skills that we find to help inform the public. And this is one way that they can do that. So basically what happens is that students are going to create their own electronic card, and they can send it to a family member, other students in the class, the teacher, or the school. The best part about this is the security failsafe. So the teacher needs to approve all of the cards before they can be sent out, and this includes the email addresses. So at the beginning of the year, usually I have a document in my Google Classroom which asks students to give me their email as well as a parent's email, and it goes home if it's a paper copy and gets signed and brought back. If not, I know that parents have acknowledged it because they have actually become members on my Google Classroom because we've invited them as parents. And so this is a great way to encourage students to engage in climate change discussions with peers, as well as people like family members outside of the classroom. The best part, though, is that approval process, because it allows teachers to check in with their student work, not just to give them kind of like a high five for the accomplishments that they've done, but to also ensure that the information is accurate. And so I think that this is really good for creating those activists and creating those critical thinkers and those people who are willing to talk about climate change outside of the classroom. It's also a fun activity. So students are able to kind of merge art and climate change, but to also raise that discussion awareness piece. All right, we're almost done. So one of the last ones here is Cool 2.0. Now, Cool 2.0 is an educational database, and there's tons of resources. There's actually hundreds of climate change resources, and all of these resources have been selected by teachers and educators throughout Canada. The best part, though, is that you can click on the province that you're in. So because I'm in Ontario, I click on Ontario, and it gives me all of these resources that are connected to my Ontario curriculum. Now, this resource can be used from K to 12, but you can use the search feature in that educational database to kind of cull it down to grade 10 science, which is what I was looking for here. And what you're going to find are unit plans. Yeah, awesome. Lesson plans, activities, and assessments with actual assessment criteria, as well as answer keys. And this is all linked to the science curriculum. Now, I will say that I went through all of those resources. There were some that were still listed in my PowerPoint presentation that I found before, and some that were new to me, some that are still being developed, and some that I probably wouldn't use. But as educators, or for me at least, it sparked this whole new idea in my mind of how we can make these topics really, really interesting. The database also offers videos, primary source resources, and collaborative projects. What I think I'm actually going to use this for, because you can use Cool 2.0 to create a classroom, kind of like Google Classroom, where students can have a closed circuit blog so that only people in your classroom are accessing the blog and the discussion pieces. I probably wouldn't use it for that. All of the resources can be downloaded. You don't have to use their their classroom, if you will, or do an online thing through them. What I'm actually thinking of using this resource for is not just as a curation tool, but to grow my professional development, because there is a teacher forum in Cool 2.0, which encourages other high school teachers to come together, or teachers of any grade, to come together and to discuss, design, and implement different types of resources, all related to climate change in Canada. So it has to do with climate change, energy, environment, and sustainability solutions. Check it out. It's really awesome. All right. One of the last ones, the Climate Action Network Canada. So this network can be very interesting. Some of it can be really biased, so I suggest that as an educator, you go through and you click on the things that you want to actually read them all the way through. What is special about this is A, it's geared towards Canadian efforts in climate change, and B, it has very up-to-date information and articles. So if you're wanting something that is relevant for today, you can find it on this website. I would couple this with an article scavenger hunt aid. I will attach the resource. And so this is just a screenshot of the aid that I would use. And basically what I would do is I would go through and cull through an article and give it to my class. And sometimes I would do this at the beginning of the unit to kind of assess their prior knowledge, but to also see if they have those skills and are okay. And by normally this point, hopefully we've built a relationship, but okay with listing what they don't know. And that's part of that's really important. So these updates can be used as a teaching tool, these articles that are on the website, but also as a professional development tool within the classroom. So let's say that you just want some extra knowledge on climate change. You can use these topics. I will say that the Climate Action Network Canada is not geared towards any specific political party. They're not endorsed by other climate change activism groups or activist groups. So most of the content is relevant, but also sound. Where the bias comes in from is just how we would have any bias with any media article, and it's from that writer's perspective. So just be cognizant of that. These articles also allow for the introduction or further discussion of that balanced reporting that I was talking about earlier. And like I said, I would really develop, it's going to require some work from the teacher, because you can't just give this article and expect students to go with it and be okay. you will have to create some sort of resource to go with it. Okay, last resource, and I just want to thank you guys for staying with me for this long. I know that it's a bit of a long video. So the last resource is from the University of Toronto, specifically the astronomy department. And I'm always struggling to find these connections between grade 10 and grade 9 curriculum in science. Sometimes those jumps are a little bit different and we change the subject matter that we're looking at and what we label them. However, the way that this is presented from the astronomy department actually links grade 9 knowledge to that Earth and Science or Earth and Space Science unit in grade 9. And students are going to look at that space unit in grade 9, remember. It provides an in-depth lesson plan. In fact, there's multiple ones, and it's going to link to prior knowledge, like I said. Here, though, which is what I really like, is that there's an effective use of technology. Specifically, students are going to be looking or going through simulations and NASA images and to create and test hypotheses. And unlike most of the other resources presented, this resource does allow for natural systems to be explored. So it's going to emphasize those deductive reasoning skills and scientific process and the importance of those. And so you can have that discussion fairly early on in the course about what climate change is, but also about that scientific process and scientific inquiry. And I think that this is an awesome resource. So I suggest you just go over and click through it. I like that it links to the expectations very blatantly, so you can kind of see exactly where you're checking off those expectations if that's something that you like to do. But it also kind of gives you peace of mind because you know that it's being linked to a resource like the curriculum document, so ergo it's relevant. I love that students love looking at the NASA images. They think that it's pretty cool. So thank you very much for following through this slideshow with me. I'm going to, in addition to uploading this video, I have just the slide deck. If you guys just want to click through it, I get that listening to me for 35 minutes is a little bit long. Here are all of the references in case you want to go through. They're in APA format. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email. My email is scox@smcdsb.on.ca, and I will add that to the last slideshow as well. Thank you.